Hi, I'm Lori.
And I'm Kevin, and this is No Longer Ashamed.
We are survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
And we're here to share with you that if you're a survivor, you don't have to be alone.
Our logo is a salamander, and the reason is a fire salamander can survive a fire, and you have survived a fire.
We want to help you with your journey to healing and hope.
We are all survivors together, and we walk this journey together, and you are not alone.
By telling our stories, we are hoping that you will have the courage to share your stories as well and find your voice.
Because stories are so important, and for so long I know that I wouldn't tell my story, but when I finally shared my story, that's when I got my freedom.
And this is our journey and your journey to healing and hope. So come with us.
So we're going to talk about Hidden Brain.
Yeah. This week, I listened to an episode of Hidden Brain, and if you haven't ever listened to it, it's an amazing show. It's
a podcast.
Or podcast and show on the radio.
Oh, true, yeah.
Shaker Vendada is the host, and he, explores what we're learning about our minds. And this week's episode was called Changing Our Mental Maps. And It was really great because I think it had a lot of really helpful information for survivors. I know for me, it made a lot of sense and really helped me understand a lot of what happens to me. And when it talks about us, so for so long we think about our brains as, and we think about the right side and the left side of our brains. And, right side people are this way and left side people are this way and so forth. But this author, Norman Farb, has written a book called Better in Every Sense. And what he's talking about is how our brains, it's actually the front side of our brain and the back side of the brain that really makes a lot of difference in our lives, because our brain, we form mental maps, and these maps are basically guidelines for our brain, and they help us steer through life without having to think about every little thing, all the things that are happening all at once. They're kind of our autopilot. They guide us through. So these maps basically are what we've learned from our senses, what we've learned from what our experiences are, and they form the maps of how we live, because they tell us what we should be doing or what we expect to happen. And so we use these maps to guide us through life. And that's what he calls the default mode. And that comes from the front of our brain. So the maps are what we've learned, and then what we expect, and what they guide us to what to do or what to expect is coming. And the back of our brain is what we're getting from our senses. So the back of our brain is the input in what's happening around us. Our senses are what we see and what we hear and feel and all of that. And our front of the brain is basically making sense of it and telling us what we should do or what we should expect to happen, and so forth. And what I see for survivors is our maps have been flawed because we have been taught such terrible things. Often we've been taught that we can't trust anyone, or there's something wrong with us, or we're bad. All these things that we've been taught when we go through trauma. And because of that, our mental maps are flawed. And therefore, when we get triggered, when something happens, when our senses pick up something that trigger us, our mental maps are telling us all these things that we have to do or should do that because of what happened to us. And often we go into depression or panic. It's when our mental maps, our default mode takes over, and a lot of the sensory, the back part of our brain, is basically shut down. So we're just living in this frontal part, which is the mental map, which is telling us because of what happened to us, this is going to happen now, and we need to look out for this. So it really was exciting to me to listen to this episode, because it explains a lot about what I've experienced in my life and how I've recognized that a lot of times I go into this default mode, but my default mode is faulty. And because of that, I've reacted poorly in situations, or just completely shut down in situations.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is that we can be intentional and focus on changing that mental map. So I think that there was a time when we thought this is the way I am. But now the good news is, yeah, we've patterned ourselves or we've been patterned, but we can actually begin to shift and change that.
Yeah, and that was the really exciting part about it is you can become aware of your mental maps and you can learn how to change them and how to adjust them and have a healthier map. And this is one thing we've talked about before is when you're in that state where your default takes over and you're following this mental map that's telling you you need to panic or you need to shut down. What you do is you try to reconnect with your senses, with your sensory, the back part of your brain. Try to reconnect with what is actually happening around you. Connect to your environment, connect to your breathing, maybe take a walk, do something to get out of your mental map, but get into your senses. And part of what really helps is not only doing that, but actually intentionally trying to find out what it is you would want to do rather than what it is you automatically do. And so you can experience your senses and then experience what it is you would like to change about the situation, experience what it is you can, and from doing that, you can learn that your map, your default isn't always right, and you can change it. You can change it by saying, well, this also works. I can do this instead. I can change and try this instead. I can try something else rather than just shutting down or going to drugs to shut myself down or panicking or going into depression. If you're staying connected to your senses and then intentionally trying to find a new way of handling the situation.
Yeah, I love the example that the author gave about how his kids would always be late and he'd yell at them. And it's that whole thing of insanity, really. You know, it's we keep doing the same thing, thinking we'll get different results. And so he realized this isn't working. Like it's taking that moment to, like you say, to be present in your senses and to go, wait a minute, this isn't working. And we are brilliant problem solvers. And so he came up with the tickle bug. And so rather than yelling at them, starting their day awful, he went to the tickle bug, which was something he would have never thought of or never done. And it turned into this thing that they always love about him now. But before, all he would do is yell. And it was like, it didn't work, but he kept doing it.
Yeah, because his kids were always, he wanted to get them to school on time, but they were always wanting to play or do something else or just avoiding it. And he'd get angry even though he intentionally didn't want to be angry. But the default was, we're going to be late. Don't they know that they're going to be late? But when he intentionally paid attention to his senses and to the moment and realized, well, they don't care that much about being late. It's not that important to them. What's important to them is to be happy in the moment. He found another way of getting them ready and getting there on time without just yelling about it and getting upset and angry. So that shows how we can change our mental map. We can change our default mode by paying attention to it and paying attention when it's taking over. I think that's the first step, is paying attention when it is taking over, then getting centered in our senses and being attentive to actually what's happening around us, and then being intentional about wanting to change maybe what our map is, what we automatically do, and what we can do instead.
And the thing about recognizing is when we start recognizing, a lot of times the first couple times it's after the fact.
Of course, hindsight is 2020.
Right. But as we do it and start recognize, then we'll recognize in the middle and we can shift. And that's really powerful. We learn this about habits, is when you change something right in the middle. For instance, if you're talking and you always say, if you just stop, then something in your brain starts to recognize. So that's so powerful. So don't be discouraged if you recognize after, because pretty soon you'll recognize in the middle. And that's the best place to recognize for growth. And then pretty soon you'll recognize as you're coming upon it. And then one day something's going to happen and you're going to go, wait a minute, I did it different and I didn't even think about it, because it's such a process of just being aware, because now if you think about it, if you think of a time that maybe you do this with your mental map, now your brain's starting to go, oh, I'll try to recognize that next time. Mm-hmm. So just in hearing this and thinking about it, we start to think, oh, I can make changes and I'm not doomed to always be the same way.
Yeah, I don't always have to follow that map. And that's the amazing thing is we can teach our brain. We can teach our mind things. And it comes from learning about our brain, learning about our mind, learning our maps. And I think that's the important part for survivors is to learn what our mental map is, what our default is. And our brain does that for a reason. I mean, we need to streamline, we need to conserve energy. So our brain's forming these maps for a reason. They're important. They basically make it easier to navigate in the world without focusing on everything all the time. I mean, think about when you're driving somewhere that you always go to. I've driven for 10, 15 minutes and then just, not even paying attention and then suddenly realized, oh my gosh, I'm already here. I don't know. I had no idea I got here already. My mind was completely elsewhere. Your brain does that to conserve energy, basically. So our maps are important. But when I was listening to this, I was thinking, oh, I know my maps have been so flawed in the past because I had those. And now I don't think of it as tapes, but it's that mental map, the tapes that we've heard, the tapes that we've been taught that tell us, oh, you're always going to be a failure. You're doomed. Oh, you're a bad person. Oh,
nothing good ever happens.
Yeah. And because of those maps, that's what we go to in situations where something happens and we think, oh, of course that happened because nothing ever good happens to me, or I'm a bad person because I did this. Or so what the starting point is paying attention to your maps, paying attention to what it is that your brain goes into in default mode, and then trying to catch that when it's happening. And then you can start paying attention to your senses, going to the back of your brain and getting centered in what is actually happening, not listening to that map or going automatically into default mode. And one of the really interesting things they talked about was how people with depression, they studied what happens in their brains, and what they realized is it's not that the default mode takes over, but our sensory mode, the back part of our brain, basically starts to shut down completely. So you're becoming unaware of where you are, really, what's going on, your what's happening around you, your senses of smell and sight and hearing and all the different senses basically start to shut down, and so your brain automatically just goes to that default mode all the time. But then you're just listening to that recording all the time. So when you're in depression, you're not aware of anything else around you.
It's a numbing, really. And when you
Yeah.
think about it, the thing about depression is it's a protection. Sometimes I've heard it said anger held in. So when you don't have a voice, you don't think you'll be believed, you hold it all in. But also it might numb us to protect us from those difficult things, but we also miss the joyful things. We also miss, the good things because we've become just like this flat line.
Yeah, you basically miss pretty much everything because you're just in the front of your brain. You're just in that map that's telling you all those things about yourself. And I know for me, when I've had anger that's been actual like rage, I've shut down that sensory part of my brain. I'm completely unaware of everything else because I've had times when I've just been enraged and done things without even realizing it practically, just blown up. And I think that is also shutting down the back of your brain, and that map is just taking over. That default mode is taking over. And I think that's another important time to pay attention to what's causing that, getting back in touch with your senses.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes you hear couples, and they'll say, it's like he's trying to pick a fight with me. And it's not, doesn't seem intentional. But those are that's the kind of nuance, is like, we're doing something because it's what our mental map is doing to provoke or to protect or whatever, that it's kind of unconscious that we're doing it. And so when things like that happen and we start to recognize, we can go, I am trying to pick a fight. I'm upset. So I'm trying to make them mad because I'm mad. Like, it's this deflect. And like, for me, just asking myself the questions, because I'm a coach, what's going on? What's really happening? And sometimes we just think somebody's has an agenda when they absolutely don't. Yeah. They may say something, and they may even say it with an edge, and I'll take it personal, and I'll realize they had just had something bad happen and I was getting the residual. It wasn't actually to do with me. But recognizing when I am doing something, then we can call it passive aggressive, whatever, when we're doing something to create a familiar atmosphere. For instance, my mom was mentally ill and she ruined every holiday. We'd wake up for Christmas, be so excited, and inevitably she would start a fight, find something wrong, and just make it a horrible day. And I remember as an adult looking back, realizing that now that was her mental map. She had to ruin every holiday for whatever reason. I don't understand. But once I recognized it, then I could remove myself from it.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it, is once you do recognize it, you can step back from it and start looking for other ways of handling the situation, other ways of doing things. And for me, that is really exciting, because I know I still have a mental map that I need to work on. I know there's still places that...
It's a lifetime.
And it is. Yeah. And part of it is just discovering what is my mental map. I think that's what was exciting about this is, wow, I want to learn more about that, because there are times I go into default mode and I don't want to. I don't mean to, but it just happens.
Is there an example that you can give us, or something that you recognized?
I do check out. And the most recent example was when we had the men working in our bathroom, and I knew that Charnel had told them about the podcast, so I knew they knew I was a survivor. And so whenever they came over, I just checked out, and it wasn't intentional. I wasn't even aware of it until the last day they were here, and I actually did interact with them because I kind of had to. I didn't have a choice. Charnel wasn't around, and they were done, and they were showing everything. And then afterwards, I was like, well, that's really strange. The whole time they were here, I basically hid from them. I basically didn't want to interact because I felt ashamed of myself. I felt less of a man. And I know that doesn't happen as often, or even very often. It doesn't happen much in my life, because I've kind of handled it for the most part. But it was really strange for me at the time, because they weren't threatening in any way. They weren't demeaning to me. There was no reason why I should have felt that they thought less of me. But that's what I did feel. And so afterwards, I thought about quite a bit, like, why was that? And I think it was that mental map, that they knew I was a survivor, so they thought less of me. So
yeah. And what I wonder is, as that's our mental map. So I've had a situation, I can't exactly think of what it was, but I was thinking that they thought that, whatever it was. And I recognized I actually think that. It's actually what I think.
Yeah.
And so recognizing that, and then saying, how do I begin to change what I think? And the good news is our mind can change our brain. So we reprogram. And for me, one of them is, I'm not lovable. If your mama can't love you, how can you be lovable? And so it's doing the voice, it's saying the words. That's part of it, but it's not the only thing. It's starting to find a way to believe, and for me, the Bible says God loves me.
Yeah.
So if God loves me and I don't love me, that's actually sin, because it's hurting me to say I'm not lovable. And so I've had to turn the words around and just say, every day I say, I am loved. I am loved. And then I have to, when I worked on this for a long time, looking in the mirror and finding something lovable about me. And it's funny because in many ways I appear as, I think I'm lovable, but it's those times when it gets rough or when there's crisis that map, it's like I revert back.
Yeah.
And I say, my mind is telling me you're nothing. What you were saying earlier, you're nothing. You're never going to amount to anything. You are unlovable. And then that it is constant work, but also there's bigger lapses now between when those kind of things happen.
Yeah, there are. And I think it's because we have changed our maps as we go through the process. I think that's what going through the process does, is changing those maps, changing our default mode. But the exciting part is you can become aware of it and you can intentionally start to change it rather than wait for those episodes when it happens. You can start to intentionally change it so you don't have to wait until you actually go into default mode and go, oh, wait, I'm going into default mode and this is happening, but I can do something else. No, you can actually change it intentionally beforehand. You can change your map. You can start right now.
Yeah.
And that's what
good news.
Yeah. And that's what I was excited about, because after having that episode with the people that were working in our bathroom, I was like, I thought that wasn't an issue anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I started looking at and understanding it. And I think my map has been changing since then. That I don't.
And probably you've changed it on this one level, but think about it. They were in your home, in your bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's those layers. It's like we work on something. And so I felt like I was doing really good. And then my family, I have a sister and a brother, and both of their families had a big crisis.
Yeah.
Serious crisis happened, and that's my family. And so all of a sudden I was in the middle of all of this hurt and grief and worry, and whether it's I let down my guard or whatever, when it gets closer to home, then we have to do another layer. We don't have to, but it helps to do another layer of work and recognize we're still okay, even in the midst of difficult things happening.
Yeah, it makes us realize those maps go really deep.
They do.
They're practically etched in stone. Not quite, but practically.
Yeah.
And so
the good news is Dr. Caroline Leaf, she said when she started with psychology, they said if you had a brain injury or something was wrong with your brain, you could not change that. That's the way it was. And she was bound and determined to prove it wrong. And she started working with people with brain injuries, and they would get back to where they were. So she learned that the neuroplasticity, and that's pretty recent that we've, so even growing up, we heard language like, well, that's the way it is, or you're always going to be this way. So we learned that. And so now what a joy and a wonderful thing to go, wait a minute, I don't have to be like that. There's some things about us we might want to change, some we don't. We can accept and embrace who we are, but also we have the power to change whatever it is in our life we don't like or we don't want or isn't working for us.
So how do you find out what your maps are? If your life's just been fairly routine, you haven't had anything going on that's been stressful or upsetting, how do you know what your maps are? And that's the interesting question to me, because I think you can actually learn about your maps even when you're not aware of your default mode, by just trying to think about what happened in the past, when things have happened that have set you off into this either shut down or panic or anger or depression. Look at those incidents and maybe look at what triggered them and what your reaction was, what you were hearing, what you were telling yourself.
Yeah, what that voice was saying.
And that's how you can learn what your map is. And I think that's important, because we don't want to wait until we're just reacting. We want to be aware of those maps so we can intentionally work on changing them. And the hard part is doing it when you're in the default mode, because that's when you're
shut down,
struggling and shut down, or so that's not the best time to start working on. The time to work on is when you can look back and understand what it was and what happened and what that voice was that your map was telling you to do.
Yeah. Well, and we don't learn in a vacuum. We can, write and journal and try to figure things out, but getting in a group, working with someone, working with a coach, working with a counselor, being in some sort of support group, recovery group is help, because they can help reflect in love things that we may not recognize because it's so familiar. Our map has been with us so long that we actually think it's normal. So then when someone new comes in and they go, how come you reacted that way? You're like, well, duh. And they're like, it gives us a reflection, a mirror, so that we can go, oh, wait a minute. Maybe there is a different way. Like the guy yelling, like, oh, maybe there's a different way. But because it's always what we've done, it's what our parent did, whatever, we don't even have the capacity to know, to recognize. So that's why it's so great to have people to bounce off of and talk with and work with, because then we can get insight and in love, because we only learn when people love us. We don't learn when they criticize us. You need to stop doing this. It's like, oh, no, you don't.
Charnel has been really helpful, because going through this whole podcast, she's been listening and participating, and she's been a really good objective observer of my behaviors and so forth, and also how I've reacted to certain things and when I've reacted to certain things. And it's been really helpful because she's doing it in love, but she's objective and she's aware of things that I'm not even paying attention to. So it does help to have someone who you're close to or you can trust that can give you objective, tell you what they have seen.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think of, I work with women in recovery, and often when people come out of drugs and they talk, every other word is the F word.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know that, but as a coach, it gets a little frustrating. It's like, seriously, and so this one woman, she had gotten this amazing job and she was actually a manager. And I just said, I just need you to know, do you recognize that every other word is the F word? And she was like, I go, seriously, you're a manager and people are looking up to you. And I go, I used to tell my kids using swear words makes you sound dumb. And I go, I know you have more language than that. And she wasn't very happy with me, but also I could see that she was thinking. And about 2 weeks later, I went to her work to meet with her, and she had some interactions with an employee and with a customer. And when she came back, she said, now where were we? And I said, do you know that I did not hear the F word once? I can't even believe it. She goes, once I recognized it, she goes, I had no need for it, but I didn't. She goes, I didn't even know I was doing it. Nobody told me. And I didn't know, because that's how I talked.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, our brain is pretty amazing at disguising things from us, I think. I know that sounds bad, but
well, it wants to keep us safe.
Yeah, we've learned these maps for a reason. They weren't always good reasons, but our brain needs them to protect us. So, I mean, that's part of how the brain protects us. I mean, when you think about before we were advanced, civilized and all that, it was a matter of survival, learning these maps, learning how to do things in order to survive, and keeping that stored up in our heads so we knew how to react in situations. But it's also good at hiding those from us, because we're not aware of them when they're happening. They just happen. We act a certain way because that's what our brain's telling us to do.
Right.
So it does help to have objective advice, objective observation, people telling us what they see. I like that exercise we did recently where 3 words to describe, and that surprised me in some ways, some of the examples or the words. And I think just having that objective and other observations about us really helps. Having people describe to us what they see in us, or what they see us doing, or what they find in us that they like, and sometimes what they don't like.
Yeah, and that we can change. So it's called Hidden Brain, Chakravartin, and you can find it on wherever podcasts are, and take a listen if you want. And also, who was the author again? Because I ordered his book.
Norman Farb.
Yeah.
And the book is called Better in Every Sense.
Yeah. And the good news is we can change. We can change those maps.
Yeah.
We can change our brain.
If you're intentional about it, especially if you are aware of things that are not going the way you want, or not happening the way you think they should, maybe it's you. And maybe you can
Hard
change
truth.
that. Yeah. Well, and the good thing is, if it is you, if it is those maps, you can change that.
Yeah.
There is ways of intentionally changing that. And for survivors, I think that's enormous. I know my maps were terrible for a long time. So
yeah. Well, speaking of your wife helping you, happy anniversary. How many
thank
years?
you. 21 years. We've been together 22. This is our
Wow.
21st wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
What would you say? I mean, 21 years is a long time. What would you say are some
I'm legal to
things?
drink now.
Yeah, your marriage is legal to drink.
Yeah.
What would you say are some things about marriage that, I don't know, some reflections?
It was funny because we were talking about this. It doesn't seem like 21 years, but when I think about all that we've been through so much, and most of it really good. Some of it, of course, very hard, but it just amazes me at how much we've gone through. And for me, what I think is how much my life has changed for the better. Just by meeting her and falling in love with her and marrying her, and how much she has added to my life. I mean, there's just so much that I know because of who I was. I was not going many places, and I've just experienced so much because of knowing her and being married to her. It's just opened my horizons by a lot. So yeah, I'm just amazed that I got to meet someone like her.
I love that.
So that's it for today.
We are going to have a prayer time if you want to stick with us. If not, we believe in you.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories.
If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find us. And we really want to spread this message.
Father, I thank you for all your blessings, especially for the ways you have shown us that we matter to you, and the things that you have created in us that have helped us, and also the ways that you have shown that we can grow and become better and be better people. And Lord, I just pray for anyone listening that if they feel stuck, if they feel trapped, if they feel like there's never going to change, things never change, there is hope. There is change. They can change those feelings, those maps in their heads. And Lord, I just pray that you would bless them with your presence and your love in their lives, and that you love them the way they are, but you also want them to have hope, and you want them to have a better life, and that you want to show them that way. Lord, I just pray that you would be a strong part of their lives and a strong part of their change in their lives. In your name I pray.
And Father, I'm so grateful that we do have hope, and that, you know, as somebody who struggles with depression, I know that it's really hard. And I just pray for relief, whether it's through getting antidepressants, getting counselor, getting help, getting perspective, that depression can really ruin our perspective. And I just pray that we would know there is help, there is support, and just the things we talked about tonight, that we can change our brain, we can change our map, we can live differently and love differently, and even relate with our children differently and our spouses. And I just thank you that that is possible, especially when just maybe 20 years ago we thought however we were was however we were going to be the rest of our life, and that we can learn, we can grow, and that is such a freeing thing. I thank you that you love us, that we are loved by you, that you knew us before we were born, you formed us in our mother's womb, and that whatever has happened to us was never your intention, that you never intended for us to be hurt. You never intended for us to not have parents that didn't love us. But however our life is, Lord, that whatever people have done, that you are so much bigger than that, and we can get help, we can get freedom, we can know that you love us, even when maybe our family doesn't. You are the strong God that paves the way for us. And thank you that even in the midst of terrible things, you walk with us. And I heard this verse, I don't know where it was, but in the New Testament, where you said, our goal isn't to get out of struggle, but that you want to teach us how to do it, how to walk through it, how to live in it. And in the struggles I'm going through right now, Lord, I know they're not just going to go away, that I'm walking through them with love and with wanting to learn and grow and be helpful and be loving, and also knowing that there is anticipatory grief in the loss that's going to happen, and that you are still a good God. Thank you so much for your love. In Jesus' name, amen.